Right, I think we'll kick off now. Hello, everybody. My name is Tom. I'm an investment manager for the National Lottery Heritage Fund. For myself, I have a background in developing inclusive museum displays and heritage interpretation before joining the Heritage Fund. And in more recent years, as a fund, I've been involved with assessing and supporting many NLHF-funded community engagement projects, such as, for example, the Capercaillies Conservation Project, led by the Cairngorms National Park Authority. So today I'm hosting this second FIRNS, the Facility for Investment Ready Nature in Scotland webinar, focusing on community engagement and benefits. And as many of you will know, we are working in partnership with NatureScot on a grant scheme to support projects that shape and grow the use of private investment and market-based mechanisms to finance the restoration of Scotland's nature. So when managed properly, restoring our environment can bring a range of benefits to communities, as well as helping put Scotland on the path to meeting its climate and nature commitments. The aim of this section is to support us all in our understanding of what community engagement and benefits means in the context of nature-based projects and those that utilise private finance, why project developers should undertake engagement work, why that's important, what are the benefits, and also how to undertake engagement work, practical steps, advice, and inspiration. We have some fantastic speakers lined up. Claire Thirlwall, firstly. She is Director of Thirlwall Associate Landscape Architects. She is an expert advisor to the Heritage Fund, who brings significant experience of community engagement work. Then we have Emma Cooper, Head of Land Rights at the Scottish Land Commission, Sandra Holmes, Head of Community Assets at Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and Marion Bruce, Enterprise Officer, Afric Highlands. So in order to develop a better understanding of the current demand for FIRNS funding, we are going to now run a quick and simple poll for you to complete as part of this session, asking you whether you're planning on applying for FIRNS funding. So you can either answer yes, no, or undecided. And for those who are undecided, our funding partners are happy to have a discussion with you. Please contact them at ferns@nature.scot. And while you're doing that, just briefly, I will cover the housekeeping for this webinar. So firstly, please be aware that this webinar is being recorded, and the slides you'll see today will be available online afterwards. You can ask questions using the Q&A function on Zoom or in person during the Q&A session towards the end of the seminar. And we'll try and get through all of those at the Q&A session later today. However, if we do run out of time, we'll answer them afterwards and make those written answers available on the resources section of the FIRNS website. So I'm now going to hand over to John Utley, Strategic Resource Manager, Green Economy at NatureScot, to provide some further practical details which relate to the FIRNS grant scheme.
Thank you, Tom. And good morning, everybody. Well, good afternoon, technically now. It's good to see so many people here for a really important webinar in the FIRNS series. So I just want to remind ourselves a little bit about why we're here and give a few kind of key points around the FIRNS process and timeline. So we're all here because we're interested in boosting innovative financing of nature restoration and natural capital in Scotland. And one way of looking at this is that we're trying to realise or manifest the Scottish Government's interim principles for responsible investment in natural capital, which I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, will be very familiar with because they're so important. And one aspect of this is that the attraction of private finance, whether it's through markets and through investment, it must contribute to a just transition in Scotland. So it's essential that transformational land management projects and so on do engage effectively and meaningfully with communities and create shared value and shared benefits. And that's the topic of this really important webinar. So we're really pleased and excited to be working with Lottery to deliver FIRNS. The Heritage Fund brings a very strong experience in supporting community engagement. You know, that's one reason why we're working together. So just as a reminder, the lottery and NatureScot are bringing shared funding to FIRNS. So the total of up to 240,000 available per project, which is shared between the two organisations. And at the moment, we're receiving your expressions of interest and looking forward to receiving more over the next couple of weeks. And then your applications between the middle of April and the middle of June. I've said this before, but I really want to encourage you to engage early through the expression of interest process, because it helps us to offer early feedback on your ideas and maximise the value of your ideas and your projects and maximise the chances of success. And you do have another 2 weeks to submit expressions of interest until the 17th of April. And the form, of course, is available on the FIRNS web pages on the NatureScot website, along with all the other details about the scheme, guidance, forms, recordings of events, slide packs, Q&A, etc. So I think the relevant links will be posted into the chat here, where you can just Google FIRNS NatureScot, and it should be the first result you get to. Also want to remind you that if you need time to develop your ideas, if you feel like you're really starting out on this road, then development grants are available to support you for 6 months to develop your thinking and capacity and get you ready to apply for round 2, which in 2024. So let's just refresh our memories of the timeline. We are in early April. You can see there that the closing of the window for expressions of interest, the opening of the window for applications until the middle of June. I think the deadline is going to be the 16th, but that's not confirmed on the website yet. And we'll hopefully be making decisions in mid-August at the end of the school holidays. Green Finance Institute are helping us with this webinar program, and they'll be running some further webinars through the application window to help you understand
I wonder whether John has dropped out. Can someone message me and confirm? I'm going to make the assumption that John, unfortunately, has dropped out. Yeah, thank you. And it's handy that he got to the end of pretty much of the timeline information. I think he was possibly going to add that we'll be running further webinars, and we're going to provide more information about those throughout the coming weeks. And we're going to include information about the next webinar, which is about starting project development, with dates being confirmed, but it's looking like the week of the 17th of April. So I can see, John, you're back with us. Would you like to add anything, or shall I hand over to Claire?
I don't know where you lost me.
We got most of the time. We got most of the timeline information.
I was just mentioning the next webinar in the series, which the GFI will be hosting, which will be held in the week commencing the 17th of April, which will be on starting your project development journey. And then I was simply going to hand over to Claire so we can get into the meat of the topic of community engagement. Thanks very much. Sorry about the dropout. It seems to be a hazard in this house.
Thank you. Sorry, there's so many IT things going on. It's hard to know where we are and how we're getting on. Thank you, John, for that. And I'm really hoping that the IT gods are with me today as well. As John and Tom have said, I'm Claire Thirlwall. I'm a chartered landscape architect, and I've worked as as an expert advisor to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for some years. I've worked on over 80 projects across England, Scotland and Wales. And I have to say, I'm not a green finance expert. That's something that everybody else is an expert on. So I'm here for the community engagement side of it. And hopefully I can share some expertise with you on that. Doing online presentations, I feel it's a bit like doing some kind of NASA exercise. So trying to scroll through slides and do things at the same time is always a bit like rubbing your tummy and patting your head at the same time. Okay, so this should go to the next slide. Oh, here we go. So this is a new grant scheme. Just as we start up, we're on a new grant scheme. If any of you that watched the launch of the grant will know, we're really looking for innovation and ideas. One of the comments made at the launch was they wanted real and meaningful engagement. So that's something you need to look at as part of your application. We're learning alongside you. So this is a new type of grant, a new type of situation. So we'll be able to give you the guidance and the expertise, but we'll be working with you to sort of develop ideas. And one of the things that was also mentioned at the start, at the launch event, was accepting the risk of failure. So testing out if the community are interested, using creativity to talk to people, but understanding that when you take risks, there may be failures. We want you to start with a good piece of work, but that risk of failure is something that we accept in such a new area of expertise. Okay, so Phoebe could bring up the poll that I'd done. First of all, if you can use the chat to introduce yourself and say what sector you work in. So there's two things you need to do. I need a little bit of audience participation here. So in the chat box, not the question box, that's the one with a little, just a single speech bubble, introduce yourself and tell us what area of sector you work in. And then also on the poll that's just come up, rate yourself on your experience of community engagement. So that'll give me an idea of where people stand in relation to that. While you're doing that, I just need to explain the photograph that I've used there. This is a project called Hidden Heritage Secret Streams by the Don Catchment Rivers Trust near Chesterfield. And they did a wonderful engagement activity in a local library where they were teaching children about crayfish and invasive species. So there was a dice and there were activities. So it's a lovely thing to look at. So we've got people from the Rivers Trust. So that's Elle. Anybody else in there? So Nature, Scott and Public Sector. That's really interesting. I don't know how long I see for the vote to finish for that. So Phoebe will close the vote, I think, and then I should see the vote polling come up. Leave that running. That's really interesting, and it's useful for all of you to see what else of areas you're there for. That's really interesting. Sorry, I just keep saying it's really interesting. I try not to get distracted by that. So that's interesting. The polls come up. So it's kind of middling, really. Most of you see your sort of middle ground. So very few of you consider yourself absolute experts, but not that many of you are complete green beginners. So that's really useful for me to see that. Fantastic. Thank you. I love a bit of community, a little bit of audience engagement, which is appropriate on an engagement event. Okay, so hopefully this will scroll through to the next one now. Did that go one or two? Yes, next one. So part of the grant programme, you have to, sorry, I'm just trying to manage two things simultaneously and not succeeding entirely. Okay, so if you apply for the grant, community engagement is absolutely obligatory. There's no debate on that. It's a mandatory outcome from Heritage Fund, and also it fits with Nature Scott's expectations of what you'll do. The Heritage Fund term is a wider range of people will be involved in heritage, which sounds quite simple, but actually to make that happen involves a lot of forethought and a lot of planning and just a lot of work to get it to go. So moving through to the next slide. Oops, sorry, I'm moving two things simultaneously and not doing either very well. So this is the guidance from Heritage Fund. I think there's very similar information from Nature Scott. So it just makes the point that it's mandatory. You have no choice in doing it, but it's not us just making you do it for the sake of it. We've got very good reasons of why we would ask you to do community engagement as part of your work. It's public money. People are giving money for good causes. So that's why, that's one of the central reasons we ask that community engagement is included, but also it's the right thing to do. If you're you're doing a project for the community, they need to be involved and they need to understand the benefits of what you're doing. Okay. So this next one is a little bit about our experience at National Lottery Heritage Fund. For those of you who haven't worked with us before, we've worked on over 50,000 projects and spent over or given over £8 billion of funding since 1994. So cumulatively, that's a massive body of experience. Community engagement has been really central in all those pieces of work that we've done. And I think I work for various organisations. I work for National Lottery Heritage Fund, and I think the real strength of it is that level of community engagement and involvement. So we end up with some fantastic projects. This is Nissan Harrod War Memorial Park in Pontypridd, and it's just the level of community engagement, the involvement. It was a much loved park, but the work we've done with them has really developed it and made it something much more special. Oops. So why do you do community engagement? I'm going to start a bit back to front really about some of the issues that you get if you don't do community engagement, as a bit of a kind of warning for you about why you would do it. So obviously there's the obligatory bit that we are making you do, but one of the risks you take if you don't do community engagement is you get delays due to objections and obstruction. So we've had projects where we've had judicial reviews where people have queried the process. We've ended up doing the work in the end, but the delays can be enormous. Doing a good engagement process doesn't guarantee that you won't have delays. I mean, it's completely possible that you do all the work you can feasibly do and you still get objections. But putting that groundwork in, getting the community to understand what you're doing, get as many people on side as possible. You'll never have a project where everybody agrees. I think if you did, it'd probably be so uncontentious, it possibly wouldn't be worth doing, but there'll always be somebody out there who objects to what you do. But if you can get the general consensus to support, that will really help you and reduce that risk of delay. Also, if the project isn't supported by the community, then it's not sustainable. This was something that was mentioned at the launch event. You won't have volunteers helping you with any aspects that you need to do. You won't have those eyes and ears on the site, which are really useful if you're not there all the time. If you just haven't got that buy-in, the project won't be as good as it could have been. One of the pieces of work I do for Heritage Fund is assessing bids as they come in. And one of the questions we're asked when we assess is if the scheme represents the key stakeholder interests in an area, and if it includes representation from local communities. And the point is, it can't just be the aspirations of one group. It can't just be your pet project that you've always wanted to do. It's got to be something that reflects the aspirations of the whole community, not just one group. One of the things involving community engagement is it really, really helps you understand your area. Any scheme, any scale, you need to understand the site. And the local community knows it best. They see it every day of the year. They walk in it, they look at it out their bedroom window, they know it in real depth. And they know the quirks, and it should be the part of your research for any project that you do. So consider it like the ecological survey or soil testing or any of those things you might do. It's not just an add-on that you do to get the money from the funder. It's not just the pink fluffy stuff, which I've had people say to me, which obviously didn't go down well. The reason I've shown the Bluebell Woods is it's a site near me in South Oxfordshire, and most of the year it's a beautiful beechwood, but you know, it's like every other bit of beechwood. But in May, it just comes out in the most glorious carpet of bluebells, and it is full of photographers, walkers, becomes incredibly busy. And if you hadn't spoken to local people and you didn't understand that site, you wouldn't know there was a time of year where it became very busy and the little narrow lanes become sort of not quite choked with cars, but there's a lot more vehicle issues than there are the rest of the year. So that understanding and not assuming because you visited a site once at a certain time of year, you actually know everything that's involved. So can I go? Yep. So the next point is, what does the community value? So again, you might have a view on a site, you might have visited it, you might live quite near to it, and you might see it a very particular way. But those who live near it will have a different perspective on it. They might have gone there as a child, they might have scattered their relatives' ashes there, it might be a view that they love. You really have to be sensitive to a landscape and how other people see it. It's somebody else's home. They live in it, they work in it, they drive through it. So that sort of slight humility of how a landscape is used and how other people view it. So accepting that there's other views, other viewpoints of how a landscape might be used. Where are we? I've included this. It's a quote from the European Landscape Convention, which we're still party to despite our change in relationship with the European Union. And I'll just go through it with you. So acknowledging that the landscape is an important part of the quality of life for people everywhere, in urban areas and in the countryside, in degraded areas, as well as in areas of high quality, in areas recognised as being of outstanding beauty, as well as everyday areas. So it's those everyday areas I think are really important. We can be quite fixated on sites of special interest or different designations or national park. But for some people, it might be a very mundane piece of landscape. To us, it might be a mundane piece of landscape, and it's incredibly special for them. So we just need that regard and that respect for those everyday areas. The slickness of the changeover is something else. Okay, so what is community? So we're asking you to do community engagement, but I think before you do that, you need to define what the community actually is. So this example here is a project called Neemscape, and we were doing some work with them, and we had a wonderful illustrator who, as the event ran on, she actually drew the pictures of the event. So it was a fantastic kind of live cartoon that was done for it. So for these projects, I think the community is a geographic area. So it's geographic community, I think is how you define it. That's your primary group you're going to be working with. So people who live in that area and who are engaged and have a connection to that landscape. But you just also need to be aware that there's wider communities that you need to engage with. So they can be local interest groups. There might be a group who have a particular interest in a type of bat that's in your landscape or a particular type of plant. There could be sports groups. There could be a mountain bike event that's run over a year that you don't know about because you haven't spoken to people. And if they suddenly have a surprise and their amazing venue for whatever it is they run annually is no longer possible because of your work, that's going to cause real problems. And also you're not serving that community that you're working with. So that community engagement can be both positive and negative. Those wider supporters can really back your scheme and be a great help, but also, particularly with online stuff, you can really risk things going a bit sideways. And you just need to be aware that you have to manage that knowledge, manage that content, and be aware that there's other people involved in your scheme who might not be right on your doorstep. Okay. So when you do community engagement work, one of the really important questions is who isn't here? So you need to understand what the community looks like, but who aren't you hearing from? I think any of you who've done community engagement, and a lot of you kind of give yourself middle ranking community engagement skills. So you've done these events, you know what you need to do. It's who hasn't come along and whose voice have we not heard. This is a dashboard. It's a sort of experimental thing from the Office of National Statistics, which at the moment only, so this obviously only covers England and Wales. Scotland census does have some similar information, but I chose this despite it not being the right region because it just gave a good representation of the kind of information you can explore. So for the most northerly parish that I could find, it gives you an age profile. So if you don't, you can see that section on the left, the age profile area there. So it shows that this parish has an older age profile than you would than average. This one's useful. The little black line is national average. So it's really good to compare. So it will show you things like level of deprivation. It will show you level of health concerns, how far people travel for work, all sorts of really interesting data, levels of education. So those kind of things are worth considering when you're planning a consultation. Don't just assume all the other people are like you, which is a very natural thing to do. There'll be a lot of different things to explore. Whenever I've done I've used this tool on a project, I've always discovered something about an area that I didn't know before. It's always given me some extra insight that I hadn't anticipated. So the next thing, if you're doing community consultation, you need to look at the practicalities. So this is, I've chosen some steps. They're beautiful historic steps to a beautiful historic building near me. But for some people, that would make that site completely inaccessible. Just really think through, for the wide range of people, how they would get into the venue that you used. And also the approach you take, that open and friendly, not having to walk into a sort of intimidating space and the sort of experts lined up to interrogate them, keeping it really informal, that people are confident to walk through the door. Other sort of practical things like times of day, don't just have it, you know, when people are putting their kids to bed and people with children couldn't come along. Try and look at either different times of day or a long range of time that people can come along to you. And one thing I always do is I try and choose a venue with a carpet, which sounds a very odd thing, but actually that really helps with the acoustics and means that anyone with a hearing impairment can hear better. Also good lighting, so if you're showing plans or if people need to lip read, they can see well what you're doing. At the launch event, one of the comments was, we can cover some of the costs to help remove those barriers. So if you need transport for people to get there or childcare, those are things you need to account for, and that's something that you can include in your grant. Another little bit about venues. This was a piece of work I did with Sustrans in Reading for Reading Borough Council quite a long time ago. Try and avoid doing the cold village hall on a wet Monday night. It's just not the best place for consultation. People won't come there. You'll only get a very narrow group of people who've got sort of time on their hands. You're not going to see a representative cross section. So this was, we hired a coffee cart, it arrived on a bike, and we gave out free tea and coffee and hot chocolate to everyone involved, and they would chat to us and tell us their view about this little square. We were actually in the square having the discussion, and we just talked to such a wide range of people and age groups, and we found out so much more than we would have done if we'd run a sort of consultation event in a hall around the corner that we, you know, had to rely on people finding us. And it was the free tea and coffee just gave it a dynamic that was quite different. It was really, really useful. Also, we didn't have a sort of checklist. I just spoke to people and when I finished, I made notes. I wasn't writing things down as they spoke. I had a genuine conversation with them. Also, the posters included, because don't underestimate how powerful and useful sort of low-tech solutions are. A poster, you can put that, sorry, I just had a note about timings and it threw me slightly. I'm on time, it's fine, yep. You can put a poster up exactly where you're going to be. So it's going to catch people who use that space. So it's kind of right on there. You're catching people with very basic technology. You're not using high tech, sorry. Struggling to read and talk at the same time. The next one is a really good example of community engagement that one of my Heritage Fund projects did. It's a site called the Urban Forest in Loughborough, and they took an old retail unit which had been a furniture shop for a long time, and they opened it a few days a week and just made an amazing space with arts and things like that. They did activities, but it was, if you can see from the picture, there's some maps on the wall, there's some geology maps on the floor. It was just a great opportunity to engage with the public. And people just wandered through the door. They had the confidence because they could walk into a shop and they didn't have any problem with the confidence doing that. They would walk into this project and they would chat to the team and understand more about the project. And we've learned more about people's views, and also they now trust us if we're running events. They know what the scheme is and they'll come along to other events, hopefully, that we do. A little bit about timing. The high-vis jacket refers to one of the videos in the toolkit that the Green Finance Institute have been doing. The comment the person said in the video was, once the high-vis jackets arrive, it's too late. You should have engaged before that, because the second they arrive, the rumours will start and someone will fill the void with the information if you don't control that. Prepare some online content ready. So before you launch, make sure if someone Googles it, they're going to find a couple of trusted sources that explain what your scheme is, because otherwise people will discover online comments or forums, and perhaps that isn't the place you want them to find their information. And communities can understand uncertainty. You can keep them informed, and they will understand that you're doing a speculative bid, that there's no absolute certainty that what you're doing is going to get the money. And a point to make is engagement isn't a one-off event. It's not you run something in a village hall and you're done. It's an attitude and approach over the whole life of the scheme. It's that sort of openness. So always have a way for people to be involved and to contact you, so an email address or a phone number. So the next one is a very quick example of a consultation technique that I've used. And actually it was quite accidental. I printed up some banners onto like vinyl banner material using open map data, was going to put them on the wall. We were running events in parks. So there was never a good place to put it. So I just put it on the floor. And we sat on the map and we discussed the open spaces that people were using. It was part of an open space strategy consultation. And it just, again, changed that dynamic. It wasn't the formal presentation, I'm the expert, listen to me. It was on very much equal footing, and we were in sort of the same level. And people talked through the map and gave a lot more insight than they would if I'd sort of sat and done a very, very formal consultation with them. So the last main slide is this one. Is why wouldn't you do consultation? Why wouldn't you do community engagement? Sorry, you just learn so much, that insight you gain. This is a really useful example. It was a project we did in the New Forest, which is a landscape partnership scheme. We'd done a toolkit which explained about natural play, but we worked with the parish councils, and they knew their site so well, they could just sort of tell us the best places to site it, and their support was invaluable. So from what was a sort of conceptual idea from us became really well used and popular little sites. They're very low key, but it was that local knowledge and that local engagement that really helped make those schemes work. So this is me now, last slide. So just to sum up, community engagement, it provides a better understanding of your site. Some things aren't obvious, that the bluebells or the best place to put things, the community know more than you do, so you need to get that understanding from them. Second point, I just need to emphasize, it's an obligation of the grant. We'd like you to do it because you want to do it, and hopefully you will understand the value of it, but it's an obligation of the grant. It can be innovative and creative. This is some work that's done on the Neen Landscape Partnership. It's people use different phrases for the river. Some people call it Neen, some people call it Nen. And it's just triggering a discussion with people. It doesn't have to be elaborate that what you want to do, but that creativity and that innovation is really interesting and can sometimes bring out things you hadn't thought of. And the last point is about listening and engagement. So properly listening to people and putting the time to that. You're not just presenting an idea and not listening to their responses. And it's an open-minded approach. And often, the other reason I chose this picture was it's often as simple as having a cup of tea and starting a conversation with people and seeing where that goes. That's sometimes the actual basis of community engagement. Thank you, that's me done.
Thank you, Claire. That was a great introduction to the broader subject. So thank you very much for that. So I'm now going to hand over to Emma Cooper.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Claire. That was a really great overview and some wonderful projects you mentioned there too. So I'm Emma Cooper. I'm Head of Land Rights and Responsibilities for the Scottish Land Commission. And my job is around embedding the Scottish Land Rights and Responsibility Statement in practice and policy. In case anyone doesn't know the Land Commission, we're a non-departmental public body responsible for taking forward land reform. Our board of commissioners are appointed by ministers, and our strategic plan is approved by Parliament as well. One of our key focuses over the last year and a half has been around the changes to the land market that we're seeing happening and the changes to land use as well. And both of those are in part driven by investment in natural capital, though not exclusively. As you know, we have a really finite amount of land and we need it to deliver a really wide set of outcomes for us. Natural capital projects in particular can really commit land use for a very long amount of time. So it's really essential that decisions that we make now reflect the needs and aspirations of our communities at the moment, but also think about those future generations as well. So those decisions need to be made really carefully, and engagement is a core part of that, as a one-off at the start of the project, but really about building a long-term relationship with the community and thinking about how you can establish a really helpful, mutually beneficial working relationship with the communities around you. At the moment, we have a government that are looking for a really high level of private investment in natural capital as well, and that's part of what this project is about. So that also brings an opportunity for us to think about how can that investment that we're looking for really help to build and support sustainable and resilient rural communities going forward. The interim principles for responsible investment in natural capital, which have already been referenced, include reference and expectation around community benefits. And that's what I'm mostly going to talk about in my 5 minutes. What does that actually mean in practice? So we've been working with a series of landowners with some support from HIE as well to think about their approaches to delivering community benefits. What does it mean in their context? What are the questions that they're struggling with? What are the practical solutions that they're coming up with? And that's been a really interesting piece of work we've done with a number of organisations who are trying out different ways, being innovators in their field. Of that, and with some desktop and other research as well, we published a discussion paper, and Phoebe has helpfully put it in the chat for you just now. And that provides a definition of community benefits and a set of expectations which we suggest are followed when you're thinking about what's your approach to community benefits going to be. So firstly, what do we actually mean? Well, our definition says that community benefits are intentional benefits arising from natural capital restoration, enhancement, creation projects. They're provided on a negotiated basis, and they're for the long-term benefit of the geographical community. So the implications of that mean that we're talking about intentional benefits, something that is proactive, it's planned, it's deliberate. It's not something whereby at the end of a project or after a few years, you look back and say, oh, we did these great things for the community. It's something, benefits which are actually planned. Secondly, they're negotiated. So they're agreed with the local community. They're in line with the community's aspirations and needs. They help to build the community that people are looking for, that they want to see. It helps to meet real needs and real aspirations as part of that. It's only the community who can tell you what they are, and there's a whole range of ways in which communities do that, through direct engagement, but also through plans that the communities might have, and I think Sandra's going to talk a bit more about that side of things. The next implication of that definition is that we're talking about the local community, the geographically local community specifically. Now, there are communities of interest and there are visitors to the area, and they're important too. But when we're talking about community benefits, we're talking about the people who are going to be impacted, whose access to that land resource is being changed by the project, their interaction with it is changed by the project. We're talking about those people specifically. Public benefits have an impact on a wider scale. They are benefits perhaps nationally even. They're things like clean water, clean air, carbon sequestration. But local benefits, community benefits, are for the local community very specifically. In addition to that, we're talking about benefits in quite a broad sense. So what our research and connection to organisations so far has been telling us is that with natural capital, we can't have the same kind of prescriptive community benefits that we've perhaps seen with wind farms or other renewables, where we're saying that a percentage of profit or a percentage of finance in some way goes towards the local community. In some cases that might work and might be really helpful. So I'm definitely not saying don't do that, but in other places that won't work so well. It doesn't work for all projects. Excuse me. So I'm really keen to encourage people to think more broadly about that. We have this area of land, we're going to be doing something with it. How can that help to meet those communities' needs and aspirations? How might partnering with the community help to really embed those things? How might collaborating with the community help? How might that bring other ideas and other thinking forward? How might that help you to make better decisions, better informed decisions, as Claire was talking about? Really interested in seeing projects that look at different governance structures, different decision-making approaches that really bring collaboration forward, not just with the community, but between landowners, bringing different NGOs in, bringing public bodies in, private organisations as well, and thinking collaboratively, how can we do something really exciting here that's going to bring benefits for all sorts of people? And those kind of collaborations can really help to bring in a wide set of resources as well and identify those mutual benefits from the way that projects are shaped. Community wealth building is the other thing that we talk about in that paper, and that's thinking about the 5 pillars that community wealth building has. So how can you support the development of local economies in really a just transition way, in a shared and a fair way? So how can services be procured locally to deliver what the project's looking for? Are there opportunities for training, jobs, volunteering, education? Are there opportunities for shared ownership as well, and that kind of decision-making structures again? How do we bring all that forward and think those things through with people? The key thing for me is that collaboration bit, and just encouraging people to talk to each other, to think things through, to share ideas, be honest and open about things in your communication. A good practice team can help people with some advice on that front. We have a set of protocols that talk about community engagement. We've got some tools and some route maps that might be helpful. I'll pop the link in the chat when I finish speaking. But do also get in touch if you want to talk anything over, and hopefully one of us will be able to have a bit of a chat with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Emma. Such an interesting and useful research and discussion paper, that just packed with brilliant definitions and best practice. And we were chatting a little bit about this last week, and could you just expand maybe a little bit on that? We were talking about that, walking a bit of a tightrope between being aspirational with community engagement and benefits, but also being pragmatic and what's really doable in practice. Could you speak a little on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So each project is going to need to find its own balance of pragmatism and engagement, as you say, and being aspirational about what you're looking to do, but doing that in a way that's proportionate to the project, that's realistic. Community engagement is a fine balance, I think, between understanding what the community's needs and aspirations are, how what you're doing can complement that, how it can develop it, how it can support it, but also genuine engagement. So where are there really opportunities to deliver things and change things, and not setting expectations up here when the reality is something different. So that openness and honesty with communities, I think, is really important, helping them to understand what your boundaries are, where there is opportunity to shape things, but where there isn't as well, and being as transparent about that, as people are able to be, I think, is really helpful. I think the other thing with that is, again, just remind that you're seeking to establish a long-term relationship where the community can keep coming to you if there are new things, new concerns or new ideas, and where you can go back to them as well and keep feeding back and keep explaining how things have changed as a result of what they've done, and have changed as a result of what you've listened to, and where you're open to things changing in the future or being done differently. And yeah, really focusing on relationship building and being open and honest with people.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. I'm sure people on this webinar, they'll have questions and so forth. So I just encourage people to keep those, make a note of those, because there's an opportunity to ask Emma and the other speakers questions towards the end. But now I'm going to move on swiftly to Sandra, if I may. Sandra.
Yep, thanks, Tom, very much. I'm Sandra Holmes. I work for Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We're Scottish Government's community and economic development agency for half of Scotland and home to about 10% of the population. We work to deliver the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, and we very much welcome its focus on green recovery and a wellbeing economy. And we see natural capital as a huge regional opportunity for our area. My role in HI is really about working to support community-led development centred on asset ownership, and I hope to bring some of that into my presentation just now. Claire and Emma have both set the scene really well in terms of community engagement and benefit. And I suppose I hope to build on Emma's points about aligning community benefits with local needs and aspirations. And I think, like everyone here, we're on a bit of a learning journey, exploring how nature finance can strengthen the communities in which they're operating. However, I think it's fair to say that communities have been at the heart of our approach to rural development since we were set up over 50 years ago, and there's much learning to draw from. Three things about working with communities I think are relevant to this discussion. First of all, communities need to set their own agenda. Only they can determine their needs and priorities. Communities very much have to be in the driving seat. Secondly, community development journeys start wherever the community is at. This is really important. There's capacity in all communities, and sometimes this is really well developed with functioning community councils, development trusts and other organisations providing representation and delivering service and amenities. And sometimes this is less developed, but nearly always there's a latent capacity, often just waiting for an opportunity. And sometimes it's just 2 or 3 engaged community members that can get the ball rolling. And lastly, and in our experience, a community with a plan can do great things, and often quite transformational things over time. A community plan essentially sets a vision for the area. It details the priorities supported by local people, and it provides a strategic focus both for the community itself and also those keen to support local aspirations, such as natural capital investors. A community plan helps ensure that investment, be that cash, in kind, support transfer of land or buildings, that these things deliver against local priorities. And a community plan can also help deliver a developer design their projects to better align with community needs. So a community plan is good for the community. It will help support a values-led, high-integrity approach to natural capital markets, and it can help develop effective mechanisms to share benefits with communities as is required by FIRNS. So overall, I think it helps move the conversation on from engagement to more meaningful collaborative working. Now, if you go into a community and you mention a community plan, quite often you'll get lots of eyes rolling. Communities often think they've been there and done that, and that's often the case. And if so, that's absolutely great, for a super starting point. But does the plan need updating? Can the plan be augmented to reflect or to accommodate natural capital opportunities? If there isn't a plan, can this natural capital project be a catalyst for one? Could some support to start a plan, perhaps as a component of community engagement, be built into a FIRNS application? And the plan itself, it doesn't need to be a major undertaking. It can be proportionate to the support available. It can just be a starting point. And it can simply be a prioritised action list, such as the community looking to sustain and retain a local shop, securing land perhaps for affordable housing, or improving the energy efficiency of a local hall. So these are kind of broader benefits, and this could be augmented with opportunities perhaps more directly related to the natural capital proposal, such as creating training and apprenticeship opportunities, perhaps offering school work experience, project staff residing locally, or using local contractors. So just to sum up, the plan belongs to the community. However, it can reflect opportunities arising from the natural capital proposal. The community itself sets the ambition of the plan. You need to start where the community is at, and the plan can and should evolve over time. So in short, the plan will help put community engagement benefit principles into practice, ideally to hopefully deliver more meaningful community outcomes. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Sandra. And this is a really helpful from my point of view, because in considering what we might think of as the benchmark for engagement at a very early stage in a project, when a applicant or grantee might be considering how to develop a project from a cold start, say, I wondered whether you know, to what extent is that community plan, could that be a desk-based exercise? From what you've said, it would suggest it needs to be more than that. Can you say a little more about that?
Yes, sure. I think if you're looking at doing a really comprehensive plan, there is a role for desk-based research in terms of providing some really useful context. However, desk-based research on its own doesn't usually capture information that's really specific to the local community. Often desk-based research will take on a much larger area, so it won't capture the community's aspirations and needs. So I suppose the long and the short of it is there really isn't a substitute for actually engaging directly with people and just asking them what's important to them and how can the proposal help deliver their community aspirations and needs.
When I was talking with your colleague last week, we were talking about, she was talking a little bit about the difference between social impact and community benefits. Can you speak to that?
Yes,
and I'm
sure.
talking about to what degree one is actively engaging rather than something more passive, and to just be clear about the difference. I found that very helpful.
Yes, indeed. I think Emma touched on some of this. So I suppose there's lots of terminology out there. This whole area is full of lots of jargon and buzzwords, and I suppose social impact, public benefits, common goods, they all mean different things to different people. But the way that I look at it is that I think community benefits are really place specific, and I think looking at a place-based approach to development are really helpful starting points. And it's really about really engaging with the broader needs of the local geographic community. And as Emma was saying, it's looking at delivering benefits that are intentional, benefits that don't just happen because the project's happening anyway. There should be benefits that are negotiated and discussed in a two-way conversation with the community to help those benefits really respond to community need and aspiration. And of course, natural capital projects deliver much broader benefits, which are equally important, but perhaps not quite so specific to that local geographic community. And that's all the sort of wider public benefits, things like furthering biodiversity, working towards net zero, clean air, improved habitats, and carbon sequestration. But what we're focusing on here is something that's really specific, rooted and grounded in the local community in which the project is operating.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. That's been very helpful. I'm going to pass on now then to Marion.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thank you so much for the other speakers. It's been really interesting to hear everybody's take on this. And I've been asked just to say a few words about Trees for Life. So I'm Enterprise Officer for Trees for Life. And I guess to talk a little bit about the work that we do in the Highlands of Scotland. So Afric Highlands on this introductory slide is a wider project within the landscape that Trees for Life works in. So I'm going to talk a bit about both. Afric Highlands specifically is a landscape restoration project. So it has huge aspirations to work at scale to restore ecosystems, to bring nature back to a degraded landscape in the central Highlands of Scotland. And in terms of the way that we like to talk about community engagement is actually really to change the language. We really need to start talking about community engagement, community participation rather than just engagement, because as a number of the other speakers said earlier, that is the way to make these projects happen and to ensure the longevity of the restoration work that we're all here to try and create. So it's not just about engaging with people, it really is ensuring that they're part of the process. So in terms of Trees for Life, we have different communities that we work with. We have a community of interest. So we're a charity, we have lots of supporters, volunteers who are working from across the UK and internationally. We have corporate sponsors and partners, and we have Rewilding Europe as a major partner. But of course, we're embedded in a place, and actually Trees for Life own an estate within the landscape that we work in. We've been working in the Highlands for 30 years. It's our 30-year anniversary. So people have been living and have been part of this community in the Highlands for that length of time. We've owned the Dundregan estate since 2008, and that estate has gone from having one full-time person to when the nursery was added. So the nursery is down at the bottom right there. There was 6 full-time employees. It's now going to more than 20 staff that are employed at the estate. And the Rewilding Centre, which is going to open on the 15th of April, is a real way in which to invite people, local people, visitors to the area, to enjoy the estate, understand what rewilding is, and actually bring back people to a landscape from which they have been excluded for hundreds of years. And part of the work that we do here is really to ensure that the culture of the place is at the forefront of all the work that we do. So this slide here just shows a number of bits of the Rewilding Centre, which you'll be able to go and visit soon. And Gaelic culture is at the heart of what we do, within the names, within the interpretation, within the centre, and even down to the artwork. So this part of the artwork was inspired by children's from the local school, what they wanted that to be and what animals.
Marion, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we're not seeing your slides.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
All right.
I thought you were seeing them. I'm sorry. Let me see.
They did come up for a moment, but they disappeared again before you started speaking, Marion.
Right. Let's see if I can change that. Can you see them now?
Yeah, not on slide view yet, but yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, that seems to be the first slide.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I could see them. Clearly you can, yeah. So this is the area that we work in here, and that's where it is in Scotland. So it's a huge area, 100,000 hectares. This is the slide I was talking to about what the rewilding centre will look like, and the way that the local community and the local culture is absolutely embedded in the way that that's been designed, in the way that people are invited in. So actually the first people to be invited into that rewilding centre, which on Saturday was the local community. That's in advance of the official opening. It's in advance of all the press. It's in advance of the opening to the public. They are the most important people to actually have first sight of what that new centre looks like. And I guess everything that we do at Trees for Life, and particularly in Africa Highlands, is to really focus on the fact that people and nature and the economy, that green transition that the other speakers have talked about, is central, and that you can't, we talk about it being a three-legged stool. You can't actually have any of them without the three of them working together. And we like to really focus on the UN SDGs. The picture on the left is a really nice way from the Stockholm Resilience Centre of showing how nature, society and the economy are part of that whole system, but really giving a sort of more interesting and more useful balance between how those three, in terms of how they interact. And also we're focused on the 10 principles of ecosystem restoration. And if I can bring your attention to that, and maybe somebody will put that in the chat as well, that actually there has to be broad engagement, there has to be benefits for nature and for people, and there has to be a local context to that. And I think that's really important, is understanding what the local context is. So we're working in a landscape where for hundreds of years people have been moved off the land, have been disengaged, and so there are few job opportunities, there's chronic housing. These are the things that are really important to the people that live there, and actually that's where the benefits need to lie. And if I'd like to bring your attention to 7 of ecosystem restoration, which talks to be a shared vision, and that shared vision can only come from really in talking with people, and that discussion has to be, how do we bring this shared vision and how do we work together to make that happen? We can't do it on our own. It has to be everybody working together, and that has to be it has to work for everybody. So investors have to have feedback, they have to have incentives to bring that investment to make that happen, but also there absolutely has to be community benefits to make that a viable project. And when there are when there are differences between those ideas, there has to be a fair way of actually having those discussions, a respectful way of actually allowing those discussions and coming to that shared understanding of the way forward. And that's something that we're not really very good at yet, I think, and the governance systems around these types of projects is key to actually making them work in the long term, I think. So just to kind of really recap, this is, in our view, about participation and not just engage, and coming to that shared vision of what those landscape changes are. And that's really difficult for many communities, because this is change on a vast scale, and it has to happen slowly. It has to be, you listen to what people are saying, you have to be respectful of their views and negotiate that way of working. It has to be based completely on respect and trust, otherwise it's not going to work. And of course, those benefits have to be culturally context specific to the place in which you're working. So we're working in quite a specific area with a very strong history, which still impacts on people today. I would say that actually these have to be community led. So in Trees for Life see ourselves as part of the community. We are living in that landscape. And actually we are working with people all around us. So it's not something other. This is not something being led by somebody that lives somewhere else. It's actually about bringing people together in a place to make that work. And of course, it has to be fair governance at the end of the day. It has to work for everybody. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you,
Marion. It's really helpful just to see that example of action on the ground and to hear about your approach there. And yeah, in terms, so basically you've really set out some very clear sort of advice about how to work with communities and what the important principles are. We've got a clear sense of that. And so, but it seems to me that there's been, when you're talking about attracting investors, there's obviously been commercial success, and there's also been a good degree of success with community engagement. And actually, to some extent, you're inferring that that's the same thing, and that they're combined. Do you want to just speak a little bit more?
Yeah, of course, we're trying to bring investment in, because there's a lot of work that needs done to actually make these changes happen for nature. And so investors, I mean, we talk about investors needing to be invested and not investing. This is not a money-making exercise. This is about bringing people who can bring their money to make those changes, but they have to be part of the shared vision that the communities have decided upon. It's not something that can be done from outside. And actually, I think really the only reason that we are able to work in this way across this landscape is the fact that we are part of the community. We've been working in this community for 30 years. And our staff, our communication team would admit that they don't always get it right. It's a very difficult balance to get, but we are absolutely, that is, up there in terms of, we know that this cannot work without engaging or actually participating with the people that also live in that landscape. It is that about co-creating that shared vision, and that's the key to make these projects successful, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you, Marion. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to John for a 20-minute or so spent looking at questions that have been submitted in the chat and any others that are coming to people's minds. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Tom. So if the panelists, so that's all the speakers, Claire and Emma and Sandra and Marion could put your cameras on, that'd be good. That was a great set of talks, and apart from learning a lot, it also illustrated, I think, the fact that good and effective community engagement and participation is challenging. It's also of enormous benefit, far beyond the simple fact that it's a requirement of the grant scheme. It will add value, enormous value, to the success and sustainability of your projects. So I think that's probably a starting point. So we have some questions that have been posted in the Q&A, and some people have voted for their favourites. So let's start at the top. The top question is from Alex Cameron Smith. How can we carry on with long-term engagement and support in or with a community when funding models are project-based and end after a fixed period? Maybe I could go to Claire, see if you've got a first response to this question.
It is. I mean, when we give money under the National Lottery Heritage Fund, we ask you to look at ongoing, so the legacy of a scheme once you've been funded by us. But it's an ongoing issue. I think what Marion was saying about the engagement and involvement can be one of your sort of techniques to make the engagement continue after the funding ends. But it's so difficult. I mean, I'm not really giving a very helpful answer. I suppose my answer is it's very difficult, and the more engagement and involvement you can get from the community, and things like helping groups set up their own governance models and help them apply for funding themselves, those can be ways that it continues after the fixed time period. But it is very difficult. I don't know if anyone else has got any. Emma, did you want to step in?
Thanks, Claire. I was just going to say that in part that's about that openness and honesty at the start of a project. So, you know, you're clear with the community that this is a specific project, it has specific timescales, constraints to it, and this is what you're hoping for. But, you know, explaining that as part of it, I think, and these are things that could happen afterwards, but in part that depends on circumstances which, you know, you don't necessarily have control of.
I suppose part of the answer could be that if you engage successfully with the community and get them participating, then that participating becomes more self-sustaining, because the community itself has a stake and receives benefits, and therefore wants the work to carry on. Marion.
Yeah, I completely agree, John. Actually, we have, compared to other European countries, we have like one tier of local governance missing, and that's the lowest tier, which has only really been filled in Scotland legislatively through community oh, sorry, I've lost the word. Yeah, so we're missing. So the development trusts have filled the gap of that tier of government, and develop community councils. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for, David. Yeah. But actually, across the rest of Europe, local people do decide on what happens in local places, and that's funded. Development trusts have filled that gap. And actually, if there are direct benefits, as the model that we've tried out, where a third of our carbon offset payments have gone to local community organisations, it gives local communities that ability to be involved in the long term, because they have resources to do that. And actually, that's part of the work that we've seen the wind farm funds have done. In the same way, benefits, financial benefits from carbon projects potentially could do the same, to actually build those that tier of governance and government at a local level that's just missing in Scotland.
And just very briefly to add, I think it's a really good question, and it's fair to say that even communities that own and manage their own land have to work hard at community engagement. It's something that's quite easy to focus on in the early stages of a project, but it's really important to be disciplined to ensure that it's embedded. And I think it's all about building those relationships and really having proper partnership working.
Thanks, everybody. That kind of links to a question that I actually wanted to ask, because one of the things that struck me as you were all speaking was that some people might be feeling a bit intimidated by the amount of work that's required. And I just wonder if we could set this into the context of what's expected in an application to FIRNS, as opposed to what FIRNS will fund, because FIRNS will fund the work that's required to help you to engage with communities and to help communities participate in your projects. Sandra, you've got quite a lot of experience of grants and so on through HIGH. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're quite right, John. I think with these projects, because it's so new and so evolving, it's very easy to be completely overwhelmed with all the things that have to be done. I think in terms of applying for the funding, again, it depends. Everything is so specific to the project and specific to the community and the scale and everything else. But perhaps just having a plan about how you're looking to engage and how you're going to build on that over time, and what mechanisms can be put in. So as the project grows and develops, the community is part of that. So it's quite difficult to give specifics. I don't know if Emma's got anything in terms of something a bit more specific based on the research that you've been doing.
Thanks, Sandra.
Oh, I think Emma's frozen.
Lost Emma there.
My virus is catching. Okay. Well, yeah, I think it's important, that so applicants for FIRNS should be really thinking hard about how to make community participation and engagement a central part of their project and not an add-on, as was said. But we don't expect you to have done all the work to engage with the community before you put your application in. I think is a simple way of putting it. Emma, sorry, we lost you for a moment.
Yeah, my internet, I think, dropped out for a second. So I was saying that I think start by being transparent. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to share ideas or they want to collaborate? And talking initially, doing that desktop-based research a bit. What are the local plans and actions in place already? Who are the key people in your organisation? How will you engage with them? So I think putting together that kind of initial plan is probably a first step for people, and not always as complicated as it can sound when you hear about these amazing projects that other people have done and these innovative ideas they've had. They're great, but the basics are: who should you be talking to? How can you be transparent about how they can get in touch with you and work with you?
Thanks, Emma. Tom.
I think it's just recognizing that those people who are wanting to apply under this scheme may be at very different points, and each project will be this is what I'm picking up. Each project will be very bespoke in terms of its context, but also the degree of development will be different for each. And it's just really keen to emphasize that we're very welcoming and encouraging of applicants at any stage, and particularly those who may be just starting out and are thinking about how they can initially start to engage with their local communities, to do that, and using some of the inspiring ideas that have been shared today, and not to be put off by some of the kind of much more elaborate or developed examples that have been shared, which are really meant to inspire, but not presenting those as something that we're expecting in all cases at all.
Thanks, Tom. I'm actually not doing a very good job of chairing this session because we've only really done one question and we have quite a lot piling up. So let's move on. The next question is from Abby Gardner. Could the panelists build on how projects can better engage or encourage participation from seldom heard groups, young people, ethnic minorities, those with disabilities within the wider community? Anybody would like to come in with some tips on that? Claire?
I want me to start that. I'm sure the others have got some feedback. Some of the projects I've worked on have used quite tailored advertising. So we've used social media, but we've actually paid to target particular groups. So some projects we want to work specifically people in low-income communities, and rather than advertise widely, we've sort of targeted advertising that they see, or they get referrals from somebody like the health visitor. So it's rather than advertising widely and everybody gets to see the events that you're listing, you put them. So this is another example why posters are quite useful, and also finding groups who already work with different sections of the community. So going to them and asking them to be involved. So if there's a group already established, partnering with them rather than trying to start from zero can be quite a good point. But it goes back to that bit about the census, so understanding who's out there and understanding what diversity means in your community. So it could be diversity of education, diversity of language skills, all sorts of different types of diversity, what you need to explore.
Thanks, Claire. I'm going to move on to another question, which is kind of similar in a sense. It's from Ben Hart, who makes the comment quite rightly that we find community is a very generic term, which in reality involves a whole bunch of different stakeholder groups, often with completely opposite views. Often there is a loud minority that doesn't want something. And any advice from the panel for navigating this, I suppose, the conflict and differences within communities? Claire?
I'm not hogging it, but I've got a very quick tip on that one. I've had that on quite a few projects I've worked on, because you end up with a sort of subset who've got time, resources and influence and can sometimes absolutely outweigh the majority. Those sorts of projects, what you want is evidence and proof that the vocal minority are not representative of the whole community. So that's why trying to get other people to come along to events, so things like going and standing outside a pharmacy or a supermarket, engaging opinion, is important. So you're getting that evidence that that sort of angry subset isn't representative of the entire community. So it's it can be online consultations, it can be face-to-face discussions, but trying to just get that proof that while those views are valid, they don't represent the kind of consensus of that local area.
Thank you. I'm going to say now, we probably won't get through all these questions, but we will try and answer them afterwards, and we'll put the Q&A up on the website for you to look at. So apologies if your question doesn't get attention now. I'm going to move on to a question from Bronwyn Fraser, which is about the types of community benefit. So we're all familiar with community benefit funds from renewable energy, Emma, you touched on the fact that community benefits from natural capital projects can be broader and less prescriptive. So maybe you could start by putting a bit of colour on that. Could you expand a bit on some of the other kinds of benefits that we might be seeking to generate here for communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked about community wealth building, and that has 5 principles that people might find it helpful to have a bit of a look at and think through. Included in that, and that the core of that really is about keeping wealth that's generated locally local. So thinking about, oh, I need people to restore peatland. Is there a way in which I can get that service locally? Do I need to train people? Is there a way I can work with the local college to do that? Those kind of things are really helpful. Is there a strong and clearly stated need in a community for housing? Is there a way in which, if I'm purchasing this estate and I need these bits for my natural capital projects, but I don't need these bits so much, that you can work with the community on delivering that particular benefit as well, perhaps? Then there are kind of smaller things, working with local interest groups within the community. This group is really keen on some allotments. Is there a way in which that can be built into the project that I'm doing? So trying to think much more generally that it's not necessarily about here's £5,000 and the community can choose what to do with it, though that's great when that works in the right circumstances. But is there a way in which this land can be used to deliver multiple benefits for multiple people? And there are ways that can be done. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Thanks,
John,
Emma.
can I just comment about that in relation to Afric Highlands? One of the biggest problems that all of the very isolated communities have in Afric Highlands is one of connectivity, transport, but it's also housing. There is a chronic shortage of housing in the Highlands generally, but specifically in Afric Highlands area, and actually working with landowners to negotiate the use of land for creating more housing for local people that has controls over how it's sold on the market, and it doesn't go for holiday lets, is absolutely kind of part of the work that we're trying to do there. But that is a much longer term aim. This is absolutely about having jobs and repeopling and rehousing and having more people being able to live in this landscape. But that is quite specific to the area that we work. But it can be, there are all sorts of housing problems across all sorts of rural areas of Scotland. So it might be, not just specific, but particularly in our area, I think that it's a real problem for people. They leave because they don't have work, but they also leave because they can't actually find anywhere to live. So addressing that as a major community concern is high on our agenda.
Thanks, Marion. That's a great point. Yeah, repeopling and rewilding at the same time is a good way of summing it up, perhaps. Tom, just tell me when you want me to finish. I'm going to. Elle Adams has her hand raised, and Elle, you've put it down. But if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, please do. Okay, maybe that was a mistake. Okay. Well, do ask a question in the Q&A if you want to. What else shall we go to now? Neville Macan has a question about the need for existing community plans holistic community plans to start with, and that if we don't have those, communities are often simply reacting to somebody else's idea. So that sounds like a great idea if we have it. Anybody like to kind of speak to the tension between leading communities into this and responding to what we already know they want?
Yeah, maybe come in here. I think this is a fundamental principle that really should be trying to start up where the community's at and listening to what the community's agenda is. If there is an existing community plan in place, that's a super starting point, but it's a good opportunity just to maybe refresh that and to overlay and dovetail in the opportunities that can potentially come from a natural capital project. But in terms of community-led development, to get engagement, to get proper partnership, to build relationships and trust, there has to be an openness to listening to the community. And it's certainly not about the developer or the landowner looking to impose things onto the community. And that's everything that we're talking about here is really, working to sort of bottom up development principles where the community is a key partner in the overall project.
Thanks. I suppose we have to recognise that, as with project developers, communities are at different points. So some communities are very well organised and have thought through plans and know what they need, others less so. Okay.
John, could I just make a point to that as well, that actually in many very small, remote, rural communities, there is very little capacity for people to be able to create those development plans. They, having gone through that process, it is a huge undertaking, takes a lot of time and effort that is completely unpaid by a community to do that. So actually part of the participation of any project might be to actually give support and help for the community to do that and actually have that wider discussion about what the area could benefit from as part of the project that you're planning.
Yeah, and that relates to a comment that Claire Cooper made earlier, that some communities are kind of suffering engagement fatigue, and therefore to use existing processes and plans is the obvious starting point, rather than introducing some new need and new demand into that. Possibly the final question. I don't know whether when Tom's going to stop me. Fiona Jackson asked a question about no, sorry, wrong question. Sorry, Fiona. We will answer your question. I can't find it. It seems to have gone. The question was, if I remember rightly, about what does good look like, and how will Nature Scotland and the Heritage Fund assess what a good community engagement process looks like within a grant application. So I'll probably be looking maybe to Tom or to Claire on that. Not Claire. Claire's shaking her head.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, John.
How do we in FIRNS, when we receive applications, how do we assess and gauge what good looks like in terms of community engagement?
I think it's just going back to the fact that we are learning together. This webinar is part of it. It's part of building a consensus around what good looks like by sharing best practice. Obviously, Claire, we brought on board to as somebody who's got a lot of experience working with the fund, and obviously we're pooling our experience of good practice from other projects that we are currently funding or have funded in the past. So I guess when it comes to the assessment of the applications when they come in, we'll be relying on the combined expertise of the Scotland team, and if necessary further afield within the fund to make an assessment about quality and value for money in regards to community engagement. But I just caveat that with, again, just emphasizing that what we would like to do is to work together with applicants to further clarify, refine and strengthen their ideas and proposals, and that it doesn't have to be perfect from the outset. And we intend to work to some extent collaboratively with people through the expression of interest process and onwards from there. So the door is wide open, but nevertheless, you know, we are looking to support you to further improve the proposals. So I don't know if that helped. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. I think that note of reassurance is quite helpful. Yeah. And also, there's no prescriptive right answer. No. If you like, and we're looking to support people's capacity to do this. You know, we're all developing here. Marion, I'm going to offer you the last quick word. If you can manage that.
Thank you so much, John. And just on that point, I mean, having been in the space, working in the space, not just for Trees for Life for many, many years, can I make a suggestion that actually the best practice in this area might be that funding the community-led projects rather than those that are led by developers wanting to engage with communities, that actually when it's a community-led initiative, those benefits are already directly flowing to the community. So it's quite a different thing.
Thanks. Yeah, we certainly very much welcome community-led projects, and projects which have communities embedded in them as part of a partnership. Definitely, and we look forward to receiving applications that you know that demonstrate that. Okay, thanks very much to the panelists and to all of you for questions, and we will get them answered on the website.
That's fantastic. Okay, well, we'll close the session now, but I just want to thank all the participants at the webinar, those who've attended, for your interest in your participation, for your questions, and also, of course, thank you again to all of the speakers for their contributions. So just as we all start to leave, just once again, expressions of interest open till noon on the 17th. Further support through the FIRNS website. Any questions, contact the FIRNS email, ferns@nature.scot. And the next webinar on starting project development will be in the week commencing the 17th of April, and information about that will be again on the website. And at this point, we will close the session. Thanks very much, everybody.